Nick Wright. Nick Wright weighed in on Brock Purdy. He says the Niners would be crazy to sign Purdy to an extension. Let's listen to it, and then we'll react.
The Niners would be insane to give him a contract after this year. They need to see him next year. And there is, any way you slice it, we are starting to now get a burgeoning dossier of evidence that last year's performance probably not sustainable, that he isn't a force multiplier, and when all their guys are there, they only lose to the greatest player ever in overtime in the Super Bowl. Any other games, that's what the kids call mid. Actually, sub-mid. 6-10, 18-17 touchdown interception, 89 rating. I know you don't always think that's fair, and Brew's argument that those guys haven't always been the Avengers and this year they haven't. That's fine. Let's just do the last 16 games, Dust. Let's see if Brock Purdy maybe possibly... Ooh. So I don't know what to tell you other than what I've been telling you for 2 years. The guy is overachieved. He is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. He is a nice player. But in league average circumstances, he's going to look like a league average quarterback. And all of a sudden, the Niners have league average circumstances, and he looks like a league average quarterback.
This is a guy who was telling you that Trey Lance was great not that long ago. So just remember that. All I would say is, once again, it's very difficult to evaluate the quarterback versus what's going on around the quarterback. Baker Mayfield looks pretty good. Sam Darnold looks pretty good. Geno Smith looks pretty good. Some of these reclamation quarterbacks who weren't very good in other places look pretty good. Why do they look good? Because they're on better teams in better situations. The quarterback, is going to impact the game, but it's not like the quarterback. Nobody says, I got nothing and just I'll do it all myself. Come on. There's nobody's like that. There is nobody in the league like that. Every one of these great quarterbacks has a bevy of great weapons or great characteristics, a great line, a great defense or whatever. But Brock has regressed this year. There's no question about it. And the thing is, it's like, we're gonna put it all on him. His offensive line isn't protecting. His weapons are nowhere close to as good this year as they were last year. I mean, there's, by any reasonable, evaluation, their weapons last year looked great. Their weapons this year look terrible. Yeah. And so it's like, if all of a sudden, so it's more than just Brock Purdy. I mean, the offensive line struggles. And his equation's bogging down. So he's looking at receivers that aren't open. He's running from defensive linemen who are getting closer. He's bailing from the pocket prematurely at times because of the pressure. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just saying this is his reality. The 49ers, I mean, I kind of look at Brock similarly, and I brought this up a couple years ago, and people had bit my head off. I was like, oh my God, Krug. I look at him similar to Jalen Hurts. He's very similar to Jalen Hurts. Both guys are like 6 feet. Both guys are about 225 to 230, and they got a ton of things in common as far as their measurables. Jalen's a little bit better runner. Brock's a little quicker. Jalen's got better long leg strength. He can drive forward. And he's really good on the tush push. Brock is a much better processor, more accurate, but they're very similar. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I don't think Jalen Hurts can just say, hey, jump on my back. I'm going to carry us. And I don't think Brock Purdy can do that either. Mahomes can do it. Josh Allen a little bit can do it. Joe Burrow to some degree can do it. There are a few guys who can do it, but Jalen Hurts can't, and Brock Purdy can't. No. Jalen Hurts needs to have Saquon Barkley. He needs to have a great offensive line. He needs to have weapons that are good. He needs to have a killer defense. That's what he's got. But Brock needs that same thing. Brock needs the same. He's Hurts. Can Hurts do it all by himself? No. He's not a Mahomes. But can he win the Super Bowl? Yeah. And can you win the Super Bowl with Brock? Yeah, I really believe you can win a Super Bowl with Brock. But he needs an offensive line. He's got to have weapons. He's got to have a defense. He's got to have a surrounding cast. So that's how I feel about it. I don't know. I don't think it's any great revelation or like, oh my God, Brock this year. He's played pretty damn well, all things considered, if you've watched the games. He's running for his life. He hasn't thrown to an open guy yet. Shanahan's scheme doesn't seem like it's as effective as it's been. He hasn't had the reigning offensive player of the year almost the entire year. The defense is awful in the red zone. They're constantly trailing, it seems like, because their defense can't stop anybody in the red zone. They don't create any space in the red zone. The play calling is really, really repetitive. They don't have a lot of power on the offensive line. They can't push people. And they don't have a lot of quickness without CMC. So, but it's all on Brock. You know what I mean? It's like, it's Brock stats. I mean, you know what he didn't show us there? He didn't show us Philadelphia last year. Philadelphia has got the number 1 D in football right now, and Jalen Hurts looks great. They were terrible last year.
Yeah.
What happened? What happened? What happened? How come last year they're not getting the results, but this year they are? So, I mean, it's a team game. We fascinate and focus and are obsessed with the quarterback and the head coach. If you want to say you're insane to give Brock Purdy a $60 million extension right now, I wouldn't give him a $60 million extension right now either.
I wouldn't.
But I still think, who are you going to get that's better? Go ahead. You got somebody? You don't want to go with Brock? That's fine. I don't need to go with Brock. Who do you got? Who's going? Who you rather go with? And once you start having that discussion, it's kind of like the Shanahan discussion. There's lots of people that want to get rid of Shanahan, but only can say Ben Johnson, who's a 38-year-old guy who's never been a head coach before and has been a coordinator for a year and a half. Ben Johnson. And 2 years ago, they were saying Ken Dorsey. So, I mean, Ken Dorsey's now what? In Cleveland as the OC there?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's like, Ben Johnson might be great, but Kyle Shanahan, if you want to get rid of Kyle Shanahan, you were just in the Super Bowl. So it's risky. And if you want to get rid of Brock Purdy, that's fine too, but it's risky. And it's not like you've got all these other franchise quarterbacks sitting right there going, hey, let me get in there. This is the best quarterback you have. That's why he's playing. That's how I feel about it. How do you feel about Nick Wright saying the Niners would be crazy to sign Brock Purdy to a contract extension right now?
Nick Wright's been a D1 professional Brock Purdy hater since day one. He's a Mahomes guy. He's a Chiefs fan. Of course, that's what he makes a living off of hating on Brock Purdy. So, of course, he's going to pull up these stats, blah, 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 blah. And you talked about Jalen Hurts. Last year, the Eagles, they were in the 49ers boat. They had injuries. They lost players. Coaching was in shambles. And they didn't really have a great season. The year after, they were, one of the favorites, right? And they had a down year. The 49ers are having a down year, Super Bowl hangover, whatever the case is. I'm not going to say it's all injuries, but you can't put it all on Brock. CMC hasn't been there. That was a big part. Look at the Eagles. They went and got Saquon Barkley. He's really helped revamp that team. And they have a good offensive line. 49ers offensive line is terrible. I mean, Brock Purdy doesn't have time sometimes to throw. And you got players like Deebo Samuel who can't get open. He's not beating man coverage. And you got this guy, Ricky Pearsall, who you drafted, and you're not getting him the ball. And George Kittle's not getting the ball. So some of it is some of the coaching and the usage of personnel. I still believe Brock Purdy's their starting quarterback. He'll get a contract, probably not $60 million. I wouldn't give him $60 million. But he's going to get a contract extension, especially if Kyle's still the coach here, which I think he will be. You have a coach and a quarterback. It's a combo, and they're going to go together. You can't just get rid of the quarterback and go through flux. We're at the Super Bowl with this quarterback, with this team. So, teams have down years. Players have down years. It's unfortunate because this is Brock's contract year, so we thought he was going to ball out, but it's just been a bad year. Defense has put the team in bad position. Special teams has put the team in bad field position. The team gets to the offensive to the red zone, and they crumble because they don't have the speed to get touchdowns. They didn't have juice, and the offensive game plan's been struggling. I'm not going to sit here and say Brock hasn't been bad because he's had some really bad performances in the weather games. Brock Purdy has had some bad performances in the weather games, so that's a little concerning. But I mean, Nick Wright has been a Brock Purdy hater from day one. I don't think his opinion matters on this situation because he's just waiting for Brock Purdy to fall. As soon as Brock Purdy does bad, he's like, oh, here we go. See, I told you. Oh, Brock's terrible. He's terrible. But honestly, it's a bad year for the whole team. Coaching, injuries, often they need to prioritize offensive line because no matter what team you are, if you don't have a good offensive line, your quarterback's going to have a hard day to do anything. You need to give him time to throw, to utilize his weapons. Yeah, okay, you got Kittle and all these guys, but if you don't have time to throw it to him, it doesn't matter.
Well, the offensive line is the beginning of football, right? I mean, Harbaugh said it, but I've had coaches say that for years. You're not leaning. The offensive line is where football starts. Other units depend on the O-line. They don't really depend on anybody else. They just, so it's like build up your O-line, have a good O-line. And look at the teams in football right now. Who are the best teams in the game? Kansas City, they have the best interior line in the game. Detroit, they've got the best 5-man line in the game. Buffalo, Josh Allen's been sacked fewer than any other quarterback in the game. So, you look at, almost all the best teams. Philadelphia dominating right now. Why? Because their offensive line pushes people around in the fourth quarter. You got to have an O-line. Got to have an O-line. And you can devalue it and not emphasize it. But guess what? The Niners, look at when they have drafted offensive linemen early, look what they did. I mean, they Anthony Davis, Mike Iupati. I mean, they were in the Super Bowl with Jim Harbaugh. And look who Jim Harbaugh drafted first this year. Alt, the gigantic offensive tackle from Notre Dame.